The throne room of the Velhari Empire was large and cold and very quiet that morning. Princess Seraphina stood near the top of the wide stone steps, her hands folded inside the sleeves of her silver robes. She had been standing there for almost an hour. Her back was straight, her face was still. She had learned to stand like that when she was very young, to show nothing, to give nothing away, to look like she was made of the same pale stone as the walls around her. Below her, the main doors were open. Prisoners were being brought in. They came in a long line, one after another, shuffling slowly across the polished floor. Their hands were bound in front of them with soft white restraints. Their clothes were dirty and worn from weeks in the transit cells. Most of them were thin. Some of them had bruises. All of them kept their eyes low, except for a few who looked around the room with the careful eyes of people trying to understand where they were and how much danger they were in. They were human, every one of them. They had been captured 2 weeks ago during a military sweep of the outer colony worlds. Her father, the emperor, had ordered them brought to the capital. He said it was a display of power. He said it reminded the empire that humans, no matter how stubborn and strange they were, could not push into Velhari space without consequence. Seraphina had stood in his study when he gave that order, and she had said nothing because there was nothing she could say that would change his mind. She had learned that too, which battle she could win and which one she could not. She could not stop the prisoners from being brought here, but she had asked very carefully that they not be mistreated during transit. She had argued for nearly an hour to get even that much. Her father had agreed in the end with the tired impatience of a man who found his daughter inconvenient, but loved her enough to let her have small things. So the restraints were soft. The cells had been given food and water, but it was something. She watched the line move. A guard captain stood near the center of the room with a long document in his hand. He called out names one at a time. Each prisoner stopped in front of him, was looked over by 2 officers, and then was directed to one side of the room or the other. The ones with useful skills, doctors, engineers, anyone with technical training, were sent to the left. They would be assigned to labor post. The ones without those skills were sent to the right. They would wait in the holding cells until a prison exchange could be arranged. Seraphina did not like this process. She never had, but she stood and watched because her presence made the guards behave better when she was not there. Small cruelties happened. She had seen it, so she came every time prisoners were processed, and she stood on the steps and she watched, and the guards kept their hands to themselves and their voices low. The line moved slowly. She watched a woman with short red hair who walked with her chin up. She watched an older man who moved carefully because his left leg was hurt. She watched a young man, barely more than a boy, who was trying very hard not to look frightened and was not succeeding. She watched them all, and then the next person stepped forward, and Seraphina stopped breathing. He was tall, not the tallest man in the room, but tall enough to stand out. His hair was dark brown, cut short on the sides, a little longer on top, and it fell across his forehead in a way that was messy from weeks without proper care. He had not shaved in some time, and there was rough, dark growth along his jaw. He was thinner than he should have been, thinner than she remembered, and the lines of his face were harder now, carved deeper by years and weather and whatever life had put him through. But the shape of his face was the same, the line of his nose, the set of his jaw, the way his brow sat over his eyes. Serious and calm, the way he stood even. In restraints, not beaten down, not broken, but simply steady, like someone who had a long time ago made a quiet decision that hard things would not take him apart. Her heart hit the inside of her chest once very hard. The guard captain called out the name, Cole Navarro, human male, age 32, Frontier Medical Corps, 6 years service. She did not move. She could not move. She stood at the top of the steps with her hands still folded in her sleeves and her face still and perfectly controlled, and inside her chest something was happening that she could not name. It was not just recognition, it was bigger than that. It was the feeling of something she had carried for a very long time suddenly becoming real. In front of her, Cole Navarro looked up. He was doing what careful people did in new places, scanning the room, reading it, understanding it. His eyes moved across the space naturally, taking in the guards, the columns, the high ceiling, the steps, and then his eyes moved up the steps and found her face. He looked at her the way anyone looked at a royal figure standing above them in a throne room, careful, measuring the danger. Nothing more than that. He did not recognize her. She had not expected him to. She had been 7 years old. She had been small and thin and terrified, her hair loose and tangled, her clothes plain because she had dressed herself that morning without her attendants. She had looked nothing like the woman she was now. He had no reason to know her face, but she knew his. She had known his face for 16 years. She had carried it the way you carried something important, not always in front of you, but always somewhere close, somewhere you could reach it. On difficult nights, on days when her father's court felt cold and the empire felt too big, and the things she wanted to change felt too heavy to move, she had thought about that face. She had thought about what it meant that a person could exist in the world who ran toward a frightened child in a freezing corridor without stopping to think about whether it was safe or smart or worth the trouble. It had meant something to her. It had meant a great deal. And now he was here, 32 years old, thinner and worn, and standing in her throne room in restraints, looking up at her with the eyes of a man who had no idea that she was the child he had saved. The guard captain was already moving on, directing Cole to the left side of the room with the others who had medical training. Serafina watched him walk. She kept her face still. She kept her hands folded. She stood on the steps and did not move, and she breathed very slowly and carefully, and she thought about what she was going to do next, because she was not going to let him walk out of this room and disappear again, not after 16 years. She was 7 years old when it happened. She remembered it the way you remembered things from early childhood, not in a straight line, not every detail perfectly clear, but in pieces, in feelings and images that had stayed sharp even when everything around them had gone soft with time. She remembered the color of the corridor walls, a dull gray-green, the kind of industrial color that border stations used everywhere because it was cheap and easy. She remembered the metal braiding under her feet and the way her shoes made a small ringing sound when she walked on it. She remembered being very pleased with herself for finding an unlocked door, because she had been exploring for almost an hour and everything else had been locked. She had not known what was behind the door. Her family had been visiting the border station at Oral 9 for a diplomatic review. It was one of those events that adults thought were important and children were brought along to for appearances and then ignored. Her mother had a full day of meetings. Her father had more meetings. After that, her attendants had been told to keep her occupied, but her main attendant, a tired older woman named Chorus, had sat down in a chair outside the visiting suite and fallen asleep. Within the first hour, the guard assigned to her had done the same thing. Near the door, Serafina had looked at both of them sleeping, and then she had gone exploring. She had walked through 3 corridors without any problem. She had found a room full of monitoring equipment that hummed pleasantly and showed star maps on its screens. She had found a small kitchen that was empty and that helped herself to something sweet from a low shelf. She had been having a very good morning, and then she found the door that should have been locked. It opened when she pushed it. She stepped through into a long maintenance corridor, narrow and low ceiling with thick pipes running along both walls. It smelled different in there, metallic and cold, with a faint sharp edge to the air that she did not recognize. She walked about 20 steps in, then there was a sound above her, a deep stressed groan from one of the pipes, and then a crack, sharp and loud, and then everything went wrong very fast. Pipe above her burst. The corridor filled almost instantly with pressurized coolant gas. It was not toxic, she learned that later, but it was extremely cold, colder than anything she had ever felt, so cold it was like being hit with something solid. It went into her lungs. When she breathed in, her chest locked up and she could not get air properly, and her legs stopped working and she went down against the wall. She remembered the cold more than anything else, more than the fear, more than the noise. The cold was absolute. It was the kind of cold that did not feel like temperature after the first few seconds. It felt like weight, like something pressing her down into the floor. The door behind her had sealed automatically. When the pipe burst, she could hear the seal hiss. She knew even at 7 what that meant. She was not a foolish child. She was her father's daughter, raised in a court that did not soften things. She knew that she was alone in a sealed corridor filling with gas, and her legs would not hold her, and no one knew she was there. She thought she was going to die, and then the door at the other end of the corridor opened. He came through it fast, almost at a run, carrying a large kit bag over one shoulder. He was young. She understood that now, looking back, though at 7 all adults had seemed equally adult to her, and he was wearing a Frontier Corps uniform, the dark gray kind with the yellow stripe on the sleeve. He was clearly not supposed to be in that corridor either. He had been cutting through, taking a shortcut between sections, probably not for the first time. He saw her immediately. She was against the wall about halfway down the corridor, slumped and unable to stand, and he saw her the moment he came through the door. She watched his face change, watched him understand what he was seeing, watched him look at the gas filling the corridor and at her and at the door behind her, which was sealed, and she saw him make a decision in about 1 second. He did not call for help first. He did not go back through his door to find someone else. He pulled his collar up over his nose, took one very deep breath, and he crossed that corridor at a run. The gas was already thick enough that she could barely see the door he had come through. He moved through it without slowing down, and he reached her and he crouched down and got his arms under her, and he picked her up. He pressed her face against his chest and tucked her head under his chin, and he ran. She remembered the warmth of his arms after the cold of the corridor. The warmth of another person felt like something extraordinary. She remembered the sound of his heartbeat under her ear, fast, strong. Working hard, she remembered that he did not say anything, he just ran. He got them both through his door before he had to breathe again. He sat down on the floor of the next corridor immediately, still holding her, and he took several rough breaths, and then he looked down at her and said in a voice that was calm, "Despite everything, you are going to be all right. I have you." She believed him. She did not know why. She was 7 and frightened and could barely breathe. But she believed him completely. He opened his kit bag right there on the floor, and he gave her a small oxygen supply, the emergency kind, a one-use thing, and he held it for her while she breathed, and he kept one hand on her back, steady and warm, and he talked to her in that same calm voice. He asked her name. He asked if anything hurt. He told her the gas was cold but not dangerous, that her lungs would feel better soon, that she had been very unlucky but also very lucky. She asked him why lucky. He said because he had been taking a shortcut. She had almost smiled at that, even then when her attendants arrived 20 minutes later, running and pale with fear. The corridor outside the medical bay was full of station guards and officers and people speaking very fast in very urgent voices. She was wrapped in a thermal sheet on a cot, breathing normally. Watching the door, he was sitting on a bench near the wall. He had a bruise forming along one side of his face from where he had hit the door frame in the dark. Someone had given him a cup of something hot. He was sitting quietly, not talking to anyone, not asking for anything. She looked at him from across the room. He saw her looking, and he gave her a small, tired smile, the kind that said everything was all right now, the kind that asked for nothing back. They took her away before she could speak to him, before she could say thank you, before she could ask his name. She had carried that smile for 16 years, and now she knew his name, Cole Navarro, and he was in her throne room, and he was not going anywhere. She waited until the processing was finished. It took another 40 minutes. She stood on the steps the entire time, hands folded, face still, watching the line move through. She watched 31 more people get sorted to the left or the right. She listened to the guard captain read name after name in his flat official voice. She looked at nothing in particular, and she thought very carefully about what she was going to do. She had learned over many years of living in her father's court that the way you did something mattered almost as much as what you did. A decision made in public in front of guards and prisoners and attendants became a fact before anyone could argue with it. A decision made quietly in a back room could be questioned, delayed, undone. She had used that knowledge before. She intended to use it now. When the last prisoner was sorted and the guard captain rolled his document closed, she descended the steps. Her attendant, a young woman named Leon, who had been with her for 3 years and was very good at keeping a calm face when surprised, fell immediately into step at her right side. "Your Highness, the afternoon review begins in 2 hours. Lord Marv is expecting. Send word that I will not be attending today," Serafina said. "Reschedule it." Leon was quiet for one step. "Then he will not be pleased." "No." Serafina agreed. He will not, she kept, walking directly across the throne room floor toward the group of prisoners on the left side, the ones with useful skills, the ones assigned to labor posts. The group was about 20 people. They were standing loosely, most of them looking at the floor, a few looking at the high windows 2 guards stood at the edges of the group. The guards saw her coming. They straightened fast and moved aside without being asked. Prisoners nearest to her took a step back, not running. There was nowhere to run but the instinctive small movement of people who were not sure what was about to happen to them. She moved through the gap until she was standing in front of Cole Navarro. He looked at her directly. He did not look at the floor the way some of the others did. He met her eyes with the steady weariness of a man who was calculating his situation carefully. There was no aggression in it, no defiance, just person trying to understand how much danger he was in and from which direction it was coming. Cole Navarro. She said. Yes, he said. His voice was low and even. Frontier Medical Corps or left sector, that is correct. She held his gaze before the frontier posting. Your previous assignment. He was still watching her carefully. Something had shifted slightly in his expression. Small increase in focus, the look of someone who had noticed that this conversation was not going where conversations in throne rooms usually went. Border station duty, he said. 2 years orth. The throne room was very quiet. She let the silence sit for a moment. Then she said in the same even voice, there was an incident at Orleith 9-16 years ago. Maintenance corridor, a coolant pipe. She watched his face. She watched him hear those words and process them and begin to reach for something. She could see him going back, sorting through 16 years of memories, looking for a corridor, a burst pipe, a cold gas, a child against a wall. She could see the moment he found it. His expression did not break open the way some people's would have. He was too controlled for that, too practiced at keeping himself steady, but something moved behind his eyes. Something shifted in the set of his jaw. He was looking at her face differently now, not at her rank, not at the danger she represented, but at her face itself. He was looking at the shape of her nose and the angle of her brow and the particular way her eyes sat, and he was laying it over something old and half remembered. There was a child, Serafina said quietly. He did not speak for a moment. Then he said very carefully, that was you. Yes. He looked at her. She looked back at him. Around them the throne room was perfectly silent. The guards were staring. Leon was staring. The other prisoners were making a careful effort to look at the walls, but none of that mattered particularly. I did not know who you were, he said, the same calm voice, not apologizing, not performing, just saying a true thing. I know, she said. That is the entire point. He absorbed that. He gave a very small nod, the kind that meant he understood more than the words themselves. She turned to the guard captain. She made her voice clear and even, and she did not leave any spaces in it for questions or hesitation. This prisoner is removed from the labor assignment effective immediately. He is to be transferred to the East Wing guest quarters. He is to be given clean clothes, food, and anything else he requires. He is to be treated as a guest of this court, not a prisoner. His restraints are to be removed right now. The guard captain opened his mouth. She looked at him with a particular look she had spent 23 years developing, not Angry, not aggressive, simply immovable. He closed his mouth. He turned to the nearest guard. You heard the princess. Remove the restraints. The guard moved. Forward, the soft white bands around. Cole's wrists came off. He looked down. At his wrists for a moment, just a moment, and then he looked back up at her, the other prisoners, he said, not a demand, not a challenge, just a question. Asked in the same steady way he seemed to do everything, somehow she had expected exactly that. The prisoner exchange has been in discussion for several weeks, she said. I intend to speak with my father this evening and push for it to be finalized. I cannot promise you a date yet, but I can tell you that I have been working toward this for longer than you have been here, and I do not intend to stop. He looked at her for a long moment, then he said, all right, just that. No excessive gratitude, no long speech. Just all right, the word of a person who had heard something true and accepted it. She gave a small nod. Leon will take you to the East Wing. Leon stepped forward, her face professionally composed over what Serafina suspected was considerable personal bewilderment. This way, please, she said to Cole. Cole looked at Serafina one more time. There was something in his expression that she could not entirely read, something layered, carrying more than the moment itself. He had saved a child once by accident on a shortcut in a cold corridor and had never known what came after, and now he was standing in an empire that had taken him prisoner, and the child had grown up, and the world was strange and full of things that could not be planned for. He gave her a very small nod, then he followed Leon. Serafina stood in the middle of the throne room floor and watched him go. Behind her, the guard captain cleared his throat very quietly, which was his way of reminding her that there were still 20 other prisoners standing nearby, and no one was quite sure what to do. She turned back to the room. Continue the processing, she said, and treat them carefully. She walked back to the steps. She folded her hands in her sleeves. She stood straight and still and looked at nothing in particular, but for the first time in a very long time, the throne room did not feel quite as cold as it usually did. She went to her father that same evening. His study was on the upper level of the palace, a wide room full of maps and star charts and the kind of heavy furniture that said power without needing to try. He was standing at the large window when she came in, looking out at the city below, a cup of dark tea cooling in his hand. He was a tall man, her father, with silver at his temples and the kind of face that had once been handsome and had settled into something more serious. With age, he did not turn around when she entered. I heard about the throne room, he said. I expected you would. You pulled a prisoner from the labor assignment. He turned now, looking at her over the rim of his cup, in front of the guards, in front of everyone. Yes. He studied her. Her father had many qualities she disagreed with, but he was not a stupid man. He had never been a stupid man. He looked at her the way he always looked at her when she came to him, with something, searching for the angle, trying to understand the shape of what she wanted before she said it. Explain it to me, he said. She had thought carefully about how to do this. She could tell him the full story. The corridor at Oral 9, the burst pipe, the child against the wall, the young soldier who had come through the door. She could tell him that the man in the throne room was the person who had saved his daughter's life when she was 7 years old, and she suspected that would work because her father loved her in his particular cold way, and that story would move something in him, but she did not want to do it that way. She did not want Cole's value to her father to rest on what he had done for her. Specifically, it felt like making him symbol of a debt rather than a person in his own right, so she told her father a different version of the truth. She told him that Cole Navarro was a frontier medical corps veteran with 6 years of experience in the Orlet sector, which was the most politically complicated region of the border zone. She told him that she had been working for 3 years on a proposal for a humanitarian liaison program, a small team of qualified people, mostly medical, who would work at the border stations to manage health crisis in ways that did not require military escalation. She told him that Cole was exactly the kind of person that program needed. Experienced, trained, calm under difficult conditions, and that it would be wasteful to put him in a labor post when he could be doing something that would benefit the Empire's relationship with the outer colonies. Her father listened without interrupting. When she finished, he was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "You have been building this program proposal for 3 years and you have never mentioned it to me." "I mentioned it twice," she said. "You were busy." His mouth moved very slightly. Not quite a smile. "In the prisoner exchange for the others, it has been in discussion for weeks. I am asking you to finalize it. They are not worth keeping. The labor value is minimal. The diplomatic goodwill from releasing them is worth considerably more." He looked at her for a long time. She stood straight and kept her hands at her sides and looked back at him. He was not a man who gave things easily. He had not built an empire or kept one by being generous. But he was also a man who respected a well-made argument, and he was also, underneath all the weight of what he was, her father. "The exchange will be finalized within the week," he said. "Your medical liaison program will be reviewed. If the proposal is solid, I will consider it." "The proposal is solid," she said. "I have had 3 years. Then we will see if he agrees to this program. He is under your direct authority. Any problems he causes are yours." "Understood, Serafina." She stopped at the door. "Be careful," her father said without turning around. "About the things you do for people simply because you feel you owe them." She looked at the back of his head for a moment. "I will," she said. She was not sure he believed her. She was not entirely sure she believed herself. She found Cole in the East Wing garden. The next morning, he was sitting on the low wall that ran along the edge of the path, not on one of the benches, which she found interesting. The benches were where guests sat. The wall was where someone sat who was not yet sure they were a guest. He had clean clothes, Velhari cut, a plain dark blue, and his hair had been washed, and he had shaved, and he looked like a different person than the man who had walked into the throne room yesterday. Less worn, still serious, still carrying that settled quietness that seemed to be simply part of him, but less like someone at the end of a long and difficult thing. He stood when he saw her. Old habit, probably, the kind of thing that got trained into soldiers. "Sit down," she said. "Please." He sat back down on the wall. She sat on the bench opposite him. The garden was nice. In the morning, silverleaf trees lined the path, and the light came through them in long pale strips. Somewhere at the far end there was a small fountain that she could hear but not see. It was one of the quieter parts of the palace, and she came here sometimes when she needed to think without anyone watching. Her think, "How are you?" she asked. He considered the question as if it were a real question which she appreciated. "Better than yesterday," he said. Food helped. "Good." A small silence settled. She noticed that he did not fill silences with noise just to fill them. A lot of people did that in her presence, rushed to talk, to perform, to fill the space around her with words. He just sat and let the quiet be what it was. "I spoke with my father last night," she said. "The prisoner exchange has been approved. Your people will be home within the week." Something moved across his face, a loosening of something that had been held tight. "Thank you," he said, and the words were simple and direct, and meant exactly what they said. "I also spoke to him about a program I have been working on," she continued. "A humanitarian liaison post for the border stations, medical coordination, health crisis management, work that keeps small problems from becoming large ones. I would like you to consider it." He looked at her steadily. "You want me to stay? I want you to consider it. It is a real position with real work. You would not be a symbol or a token. The border stations in the Orleith sector seem more medical emergencies than any other region, and they have almost no proper coordination structure. Someone with your experience could do a great deal there." He was quiet, thinking. She let him think. After a while he said, "Why me? Specifically, there are other medics." She had thought about how honest to be. She had decided somewhere between her father's study and this garden that she was done with careful half-truths. She had spent 23 years in a court full of them. It was exhausting because 16 years ago I was 7 years old and dying in a cold corridor, she said, and you came through a door you were not supposed to be in, and you picked me up, and you did not leave me, and I have spent a long time thinking about what kind of person does that, and I believe that the border stations need exactly that kind of person." He listened to all of it without looking away. Then he said quietly, "I did not know you were a princess. That is why it mattered." He asked her for one day to think about it. She said yes, without hesitation, because it was a reasonable thing to ask and because she respected the fact that he asked it. A lot of people in his position would have said yes immediately. Yes to the princess, yes to the offer, yes to whatever got them on the best possible side of the most powerful person in the room. He did not do that. He said he needed a day, and he said it simply, and she believed that he actually meant to use it. She left him in the garden and went back to her work. The day was full. There was a trade negotiation that had been stalled for 2 months and finally needed her direct involvement. There were 3 letters from regional governors that required responses. There was a meeting with the palace architect about the water systems in the older sections of the building which had been failing slowly for years. She moved through all of it carefully, and she did not let herself think too much about the man in the East Wing, or she tried not to. She was not entirely successful. She found herself in the middle of the trade negotiation, thinking about the way he had looked when she told him the prisoner exchange had been approved. That loosening of something held tight. She found herself thinking about it. Because it had been so clean, no performance, no excess, just a person who had been carrying worry for other people and was allowed to put it down. For a moment, he had been worried about the others, not just himself. She had noticed that. She had noticed it. The way she noticed things she did not have a good word for yet. That evening, she had dinner with two of her father's senior advisors, a dull affair that required her to sit and listen to them discuss border tariffs for 2 hours. She sat and listened carefully and said the right things at the right moments, and inside her head, she was very far away. Lion caught up with her afterward in the corridor outside the dining room. The human guest has been quiet today, Lian said in the tone she used when she was reporting a fact but also testing whether Serafina wanted to discuss it. He spent most of the afternoon in the East Wing library. Serafina looked at her the library reading by all accounts. Lian paused. Velhari history mostly. He asked one of the staff for help finding the section on the outer colony agreements, the border treaties. Serafina considered that he was reading the border treaties. He was using his one day not to rest or to wander or to sit with his uncertainty, but to learn, to understand the situation he might be walking into, to be prepared. She said nothing to Lian, but she thought about it for the rest of the evening. He came to the garden again the next morning. She was already there on the same bench, with the same book. She had barely been reading for 3 days. The morning was pale and cool, and the silver leaf trees were very still. She heard his footsteps on the stone path and looked up. He walked to the bench and he sat down, not at the far end this time, in the middle. I will take the position, he said. She kept her face still in the way she had been trained, but something in her chest went warm and quiet. All right, she said, I have conditions. Tell me. He turned slightly toward her and she could see that he had been thinking carefully about this, arranging it in his head. The work has to be real. I am not going to sit at a desk with a title and no actual function. If I am going to the border stations, I need real authority to make medical decisions and coordinate resources without having to ask permission from a military officer every time. That is the design of the program. She said that was always the design. I also want a direct communication line. If something is happening at the stations that needs your attention, I need to be able to reach you without going through 6 layers of administrative process. Agreed. And I want it in writing, not as a gesture, as an actual official document with your name on it that I can show to a border station commander who does not want to take orders from a human. She almost smiled. You read the border treaties? He looked at her. I read the border treaties. Then you understand what the commanders there are like. I understand exactly what they are like, he said, which is why I want the document. You will have it, she said. I will have it drawn up today. He nodded. He looked out at the garden for a moment. The small fountain at the far end was audible in the quiet, a low, steady sound. One of the blue-winged birds that lived in the palace grounds landed on the path a few meters away and looked at them both with bright, serious eyes. There will be people who do not like this, he said. Not a question, just a thing he knew. Yes, she said honestly, some of my father's court will question it. They will say a human in a crown adjacent position is a political risk. They will say it sets a precedent they are not comfortable with. They will say a great many things, and I have dealt with those people for my entire life. She said, I am not afraid of them. He was quiet for a moment. Why are you doing this? He asked. Not the program. I understand the program, but this specifically pulling me out of the prisoner line, the conversation with your father, all of it. You could have just let it go. 16 years is a long time. You did not owe me anything, she thought about how to answer that honestly. When I was 7 years old, she said slowly, I grew up in a place that taught me that power was the most important thing, that rank and strength were what determined the value of a person, that a Velhari royal was worth more than a human soldier by simple fact of what they were. And then I was dying in a cold corridor, and you came through a door, and you did not think about rank or value or what you were owed. You just came, you just picked me up. She looked at him. That was the first time I understood that the things I had been taught were wrong, and I have spent 16 years trying to be someone who is worthy of what you did. He was very still. She felt slightly exposed saying it out loud. Like that, she was not accustomed to it. But it was true, and she had decided she was done with half-truths. After a long moment, he said very quietly, I just took a shortcut. I know. She said, that is exactly what I mean. The blue-winged bird on the path decided they were not interesting and flew away into the silver trees. The fountain ran steadily at the end of the garden. Morning light came through the leaves in long pale lines. Cole Navarro looked at the woman sitting beside him, the princess of an empire, 23 years old, who had built a 3-year policy program because of something a tired 18-year-old had done by accident in a cold corridor. And he was quiet for a moment with all of it. Then he said, I would like to do the work well. I know you will. She said, I will probably argue with you sometimes when I think you are wrong about something. Good, she said, I need someone who will. He looked at her for a moment with something in his expression that was not quite a smile but was close to one, warm and a little surprised, like a person who had expected something difficult and found something easier instead. All right, he said, then I suppose we have an agreement. We do, she said. She did not offer her hand because that was not how her people formalize things. She simply nodded once, and he nodded back. And it was enough. Some things were simply decided between two people in a quiet garden with no one watching, and that was all they needed to be real. The empire outside the palace walls went on, as it always did, loud and complicated, and full of people doing difficult things for difficult reasons. But something had shifted inside it, not dramatically, not with any announcement or fanfare, just quietly, the way real things usually changed, one person at a time, one decision at a time, one garden bench at a time. It had started 16 years ago with a human who had taken a shortcut